But then he didn't know doing that with so the proxies were the extension always.
I know which devices have that.
So that's what you're saying, is that the proxies have to run it against all the different servers. Yeah. I'm going to say requirement at this point.
Hey,
Good way to find out what's there. At least what's responding.
Yeah, that's smart. You always use the fortune.
You need a man. So they don't. You want to be able to see the responses somewhere near you. It's still going to saturate your local link. You want to see the response. So you get plausible design out of those facts. The facts. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a funny room. I figured I brought them all in.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I see what they did. It works. They put it back.
Put the door right there. Oh, maybe with fire regulation.
Where is Terence?
Right there.
Wrong, Terence. Okay, so I should.
This is the last of the cookies.
I can give them around while you're talking to the intro. And I'll take the notes. Do we have a note taker? Another one?
I think we'll be back up.
Okay. It's always been good. Yeah, sorry, we're just talking with thousands of folks over the bootstrap stuff, and time flies.
Want to start now?
Yep.
So you need to use mine. Okay. We're running late. Thank you, guys. Yeah, for this IETF meeting, we actually have very late sessions. This session will continue till 8 o'clock at night. So thank you for being with us. Let's use the Anima working group for autonomic networking integrated model and approach. If you are catch for another working group, still have time to change it. This is note well, everybody know it. If you are new, should read it carefully. Before beginning the meeting, the blue sheet, Terence is hand out the blue sheet, so make sure you sign it before you're running out for dinner. Will it Jeff Scrapper? So Terence, you want to Jabber? Will you do Jabber? Jabber.
Oh, yeah, I can.
Yeah. Will it minutes taker? Anyone here for minutes taker? Thanks, Mike. We also have the remote participation support. We have 4 participation remote now. All the slides already uploaded, including those. And the mailing list is going on for discussing. And this working group is co-chaired by me, Xinjiang, and Terence Eckert. The web page on the data tracker is for Anima. This is our meeting agenda. We actually have 2 sessions. One is today from 6 to 8. Another one is on Thursday from 4:20 to 6:20 on Thursday. We actually did this on purpose, so it allows the participant to be able to work during the week and report back for the update on Thursday meeting. For today, we have the Anima generic signaling grasp for 30 minutes. Then that's the autonomic bootstrapping design team for 30 minutes. And autonomic control plan 20 minutes. Also the autonomic network reference model for 35 minutes. Any agenda question for that? Once, twice, gone. This is the review where we are. The working group milestones. We had the no, okay, running, but that's grasp. It's adopted last year. It's run in very good track, but it's late for the milestone already. We are very confident we receive a few good reviews for grasp. So probably after this meeting, the chairs will shepherd this grasp for IESG. Then Bootstrap is also late. We are still asking the review for Bootstrap. Last time we asked reviewers for Bootstrap, but the reviewer haven't delivered that review for on the mailing list, so we're still calling for Bootstrap reviewing. We may not able to move that until we receive some serious review. Yeah. The autonomic control plan has the milestone for September. So, and the two use cases, which is relevant simple, are also updated, but it just keep a live update. Both of them in very good shape, but they will not sent to IESG until we have the other standard track documents stable. Then they will be sent to IESG together. The reference module has the relative late milestones, but we are working on that. We also call the review for reference model as well. I mean, this time we probably will, keep reminder for the reviewers to deliver. Okay. Okay, so next, Brad.
Okay, let's see. How's the audio volume? At the back, can you hear me or just the people in the other room? Okay,
Yeah.
If you can hear me, that's good. So this is grasp. Sheng actually had slightly wrong draft name on his slide, but never mind. We're now up to version 6. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I do get the version number.
Yeah. I'll talk about the main changes since the previous IETF when we were on version 4. Status of the prototype code, some open issues, and then we can discuss. And by the way, one of the open issues isn't on the slides because we only discovered it fully at lunchtime today. So we'll try to cover that verbally, perhaps. Okay, next, please. So in version 5, we added a requirement which may not seem like a protocol requirement, but it turns out it is a protocol requirement, which is the requirement that autonomic service agents can run as independent programs in user space. The reason for that is so that they can be written, if you like, by programmers who are not networking specialists, who are basically specialists in whatever the target of the ASA is. They should be something that could run in user space, be basically pluggable modules in an autonomic system. It turns out that that actually changes the protocol requirements, because it means that you need to be able to use a dedicated port for the unicast transactions of that particular ASA. And the only reasonable way to do that is to have that a port which is available in user space, quite distinct from the stuff that the kernel of GRASP has to do in kernel space. And the consequence of that is when you get a discovery response, it needs to tell you not only the IP address of the person responding to the discovery, but also the port number that they will be using. And while you're doing that, you might as well tell them the protocol number so that we can be agile with respect to the transport protocol. So at the moment, it's defined to return both a port number and either TCP or UDP. Of course, we could add other transport protocols if we wanted to. So that was a reasonably large change to the discovery response message, and a little bit of software for me to write in my prototype, but it's actually very straightforward to do. We also clarified in that version that the multicasts that are involved in both discovery and in the flooding of an objective need to be handled by the GRASP kernel, precisely because for technical reasons you pretty much have to be in kernel mode to do the right thing with those multicast responses, and we didn't want that to be forced into user space. So they're handled by the kernel of GRASP on behalf of the ASAs. We clarified what was, I think, always in our minds, that a node can discover an objective without actually needing to either synchronize or negotiate that objective. If you want to use GRASP discovery as, a generic discovery mechanism, that's not that you have to do that, but you could do that. And we added a section to the draft on implementation status, which is actually a BCP recommendation of the IETF that you should have an implementation status section if you have one. Okay, next please. Then in version 6, we added some more text on discovery cache timeouts, because that was a bit vague in the previous text. We noted that an ASA which has the semantics that only initiates requests, doesn't respond to requests from other ASAs. If you have such an ASA, then it doesn't either respond to discovery messages, because nobody needs to discover it, since it doesn't accept requests anyway. We added some text on what happens if your address changes under you. So GRASP is ticking along and suddenly its IP address changes. That shouldn't happen in the ACP context, but in a GRASP which is running in a non-ACP context, there's nothing to stop the address changing for some reason. And there's some text being added on robust implementation, which you can argue is sort of obvious. You should make implementations robust, but it's particularly important in an autonomic networking support infrastructure that is extremely robust, and whatever goes wrong, it recovers. It's just words, right? I did actually find that in my prototype, closing the lid of my laptop and opening it again was enough to break my implementation. That sort of thing is not allowed in a production version, obviously. We clarified the text or added open issues on the basis of the reviews we received, particularly thanks to Sheng for a very thorough review. Okay, so the implementation model that we're now based on is that there are a number of ASAs which are the users of GRASP. They will access an API which is in user space, which contains some of the functions. and the unicast sockets that are assigned to each ASA for its own business. And then there would be a system call interface to the kernel of Grasp, which would have more internal functions, the discovery logic, the multicast handling for discovery, the multicast handling for receiving flooded objectives. Obviously, the multicast sockets sit in under the control of that part, and various caches that are needed. In any implementation, you're going to need these. Cache for discovery results, a cache for the objectives that are active in the node, a cache for objectives that have been flooded by the flood protocol, and a cache of active Grasp sessions, because if you remember, every Grasp session has a unique session ID, and you basically have to track those. And because they're supposed to be unique but random, you actually have to cache the disused ones so that you can avoid accidentally reusing the session ID until you've really run out of session IDs. So those data structures are pretty much obligatory. It's hard to imagine you could implement without them. And there may be other bits of data like that. We've been having a bit of discussion for reasons I probably won't cover, but Max might cover, or Michael, as to what it means to be running multiple instances of Grasp in one node. If you do need to run, or when you need to run multiple instances of Grasp in one node, there will be multiple copies of those caches. And that does raise some interesting implementation issues, but no issues of principle in the protocol. Okay, next page, please.
I actually had a question here.
Yeah.
Because you have the API in this figure. Is that Grasp API you had another draft on?
That's draft that we'll discuss in the second session, yeah.
But you do understand that that draft is not in the current charter?
I understand it's not in the charter. I also understand that there is no way in the real world that we can run Grasp without an API. So,
Yeah, sure.
you know, it's impossible to be sure that your design is right unless you know that you can design an API.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
I don't have any problem maybe in the future to take on the Grasp API.
Yeah.
But my question will be whether the Grasp main document we are talking about could be stand alone without the API draft.
I don't think so. It just says there needs to be an API, which is sort of obvious statement, but it doesn't discuss the API in any way.
Okay,
That's
good.
Separate document.
Thank you.
Do you think there is a way to get the nice graphics into the draft, or?
The new format of RFCs, which is coming up at some point in the next couple of years, the answer is yes. All you have to do is dump that as an SVG figure, put it through a tool that has been written to filter out invalid SVG, and then you can put it straight into an RFC, yes.
Right.
And in the current RFCs, you're welcome to draw the ASCII art. I will gladly cut and paste it. Yeah, there is actually a little bit of ASCII art in the API draft, which looks very similar to this.
Yeah. So on the discussion side, I think you implemented everything in userland as well, right? So maybe
The
it's not
current
kernel
implementation is
space,
all userland, yeah.
right? So
I'm
maybe
sorry,
it's not
it's all privileged, actually. It has
exactly, yeah. So I think that basically instead of just saying kernel space, it would be kernel or privileged userland,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
So I think because I think it's good to understand what the minimum requirements are, and we can live outside the kernel completely. We just need privilege for the flooding of the multicast and everything.
I think it's because of the shared multicast sockets that you need privilege, yeah.
And then on the instance side, right? I mean, that might also be something where the folks like us who would like to pound on the instances and the modes, what I think we'll hear of, maybe provide additional pictures to show that, because to me it's just a replication of this picture with some of the instances having a lot of these functions erased, right? Because the lower modes would have less functionality.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so just a couple of slides on the prototype. It's about 1,300 lines of code, and that corresponds to the current draft. It was about 1,100 lines of code for 2 drafts ago, plus some bugs that I found. It's a test suite. It's not production code in any shape or form. In particular, it pretends it's running securely, and it isn't. It's completely insecure. But I built a test suite to just go through all the code paths, so I'm pretty sure that all the code paths have been executed at least once without crashing. And some of the code paths have been executed hundreds of times without crashing. Right? So I wrote two toy ASAs called Briggs and Gray. If you know anything about Briggs and Gray, Asa Briggs was a personality, Asa Gray was another personality. Wikipedia will tell you all about them. And you can download it all from that URL. It's under BSD license. Right. I haven't had the courage yet to go and put it on GitHub and see what happens there. But that's because I control what's on that site, obviously. Nobody else can scribble on it. But if anybody wants to start scribbling on the code, just let me know and we'll go GitHub. Next slide, please. So I've tested it on Windows 7 and Debian. Sorry, I don't know the Debian version number. On a real network. The only issue was the switch in our building had defective MLD snooping, which meant that the link local multicast didn't actually go through the switch and arrive at the other node. So I had to bypass that by putting a really, really dumb switch that knows nothing about IPv6 in front of the building switch, and that allowed everything through. The prototype has a lot of limitations. It's prototype code to check concepts in the protocol. It's not code that anybody could ever dream of using in production. But it's been very valuable in tuning the protocol spec and actually the API, which isn't on the charter, but I hope one day will be. So next, open issues. The first one is still the most important, and it's the oldest open issue that's still open. Cross-check what we've done against all the other Anima bits of work. We did a fair amount of work on that topic at lunchtime today with respect to the bootstrap and the ACP. We also need that job to be done for the your use case, whose name I forget, the
Stable connectivity.
Stable connectivity one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for the prefix allocation one, which is mine, so I suppose I should check it.
Yeah, actually, from my side, I'm not sure if I need anything from Grasp on the stable connectivity,
Well,
but we didn't specify, for example, the bootstrap proxy, how it discovers the registrar.
Yeah.
So if we can sit down on that, that would
Yeah.
be my biggest gap in the
Yeah,
ACP
yeah.
right now.
There's an appendix in there, which was the analysis of the protocols we decided not to use. My feeling is that appendix shouldn't be in the final RFC. Right. Is it? Okay, well, you know, I'm open to discussion on that, but if it's going to be in the final RFC, then it needs people to review it fairly carefully because it may be full of rubbish.
Yeah, I like the idea.
And your name, sir?
This is Elliot Lear. I like the idea of RFCs in particular, especially when you're introducing new functionality to cover ground that seems on the face to be well trodden, to explain why you're retreading it. And you do have good reason. It's just that the explanation, I think, is useful. If you're not going to have the appendix in there, then I would say just summarize the work in not with a full analysis, but with something shorter.
I don't really have strong feelings on that. I'm quite prepared to leave it in, but in that case, somebody needs to read it very critically because most of the reviews so far have not really looked at that part. Okay, then some more technical things. There's something in the spec called rapid mode, and there are two views about rapid mode. One is to get rid of it because it's complicated. The other one is to keep it and make it better by allowing it to handle multiple objectives. So the point with rapid mode is your discovery message also triggers a negotiation, or in the case of synchronization, your discovery message also triggers synchronization. So it's shortcutting at least a couple of message exchanges. And the question is whether that bit of efficiency is actually worth adding complexity to the protocol. There's another open issue on the same topic, but the real question is whether we want to make this a first-class citizen part of the protocol or not. And definitely adds some complication to the implementation, which is one reason why I haven't implemented it in prototype. But I would like feedback from the working group whether this is a useful bit of optimization or a useless bit of decoration.
Can you explain the most simple use case example where this would be highly beneficial?
Well, it simply reduces, it could reduce a synchronization action, for example, to 2 packets instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 packets or something like that.
So basically, might be better in an IoT environment where they're counting bits.
Yeah, but also, of course, if you have previously discovered the same node, you don't get any benefit because the discovery is not repeated. You simply take the discovery result from the cache. Right? So in the case where you've previously discovered that node, you don't actually win anything with rapid mode, because the redundant step will never be executed anyway. So it's a typical trade-off question. I've never really had a good feeling for what sort of rate of transactions we expect in an autonomic system.
Michael Berenger, this is what I just was about to say. Do we actually need that efficiency, given that the negotiations that we have here are type of management type of negotiations on sending parameters back and forth? I feel we do not. But Turles makes a good point. In IoT, it may not be a question of speed, and it may be just a question of how many packets we can make. Hardly.
Yeah. So it's still in the protocol. I just haven't implemented it. But in Python, the question of speed hardly arises anyway. So, I'd like feedback on that, because otherwise it's going to be an open question until we send it to the IESG, and we probably don't want that.
I don't know. I mean, is there anybody here, AD or so? Is there a way for us to put these things into, let's say not the normative section, but experimental section? That way, if we need it for IoT or so, it's there, but it's not part of the normative part. Maybe that's a compromise.
I suspect it's already a may in the spec. I can't quite remember. Here's an AD.
Oh,
Here's an AD. You do have appendices and things like that you could very easily use for informational pieces such as this. Okay. But I think I want to get some more information from you a little bit offline about it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Certainly. But it would be good if we actually had a collective view on, what we regard as a performance target. Not specifically for GRASP, but for the interaction, between 2 ASAs. If we're talking milliseconds, it's very different from talking microseconds.
I'm not sure we all at least talking for myself, not understand the implications well enough, except that it reduces the number of bits.
Yeah.
And I have no clue right now how many bits IoT equipment might have. I think that's still where we, even in a lot of other cases for Anima, are trying to figure it out, and it may take a lot longer than to come to conclusions than we would like to final call our first round of product things.
What I'm pretty sure you can say about IoT devices is anything that drains electricity from the battery is bad. Right. So
I actually would like to ask this question in another perspective. Is there any harm if we just leave it in a document, but in reality, no people use it?
If it's, if it's a may in the spec as opposed to a should or must, it's not doing any harm, but it's sort of, it's a little bit of a lazy solution.
I mean, it's one of the possibility, such repeat procedure may have security issue. If so, then that's harm done, and we should remove.
Yeah, I don't think there's a security issue. No, I think it is just complicating anything's bad if you can avoid it. But
a may in a normative text always raises the concern for me about interoperability issues. One side does it and the other does not. Right?
I think that's actually already covered. I think it's even said in the text that it should be subject of network intent with a capital I, whether or not rapid mode is supported in the network, so that all nodes get the same instructions about this.
I don't think this is the correct out of jail for free card for this problem.
No, possibly not. But that's what
You're right.
That's
But
what this
that's, I think,
text
why I worry that, I would like to not delay for IoT our, passing to the ISG, because I think stuff takes longer, but I would love us to include any optimizations that we could do for IoT without having fully concluded on them. And that's why I was looking at the idea what's the best way to do this.
Michael Berenger, I think intent is not the right way to do that, because intent should not refer to the infrastructure per se, and that's clearly an infrastructure function. Intent is, in my view, steering the behavior of an autonomic function. The other thing is, in the reference model, at some point we said constrained devices are out of scope. And I'm surprised to hear our chair not say that. So in theory, we could say IoT is, well, second round, out of scope for now, and get rid of it for now.
Yeah.
Laurent Chavalia. First thing is to comment on the IoT thing. Also, maybe not always IoT devices, but maybe for deployment of ASA, there will be gateways taking over for the devices, so then it's not an issue anymore. And the second point is there any negotiation between, I will say, GRASP kernels to negotiate capabilities on both sides of implementation? If one doesn't support rapid mode, then they fall back to normal mode.
Actually, I'd have to check, but I think it's the case that it's already stated that if you send a rapid mode, which is just an attachment to a discovery message, and the other end simply replies with a normal discovery response, that already tells you that the other side does not support rapid mode. So I think that's already taken care of automatically. I would just need to check.
That will cover a bit the interoperability issue, at least in the draft.
Yeah, I think it would.
AD back at the mic. So just in between normative language, may, must, should, if you select may, that you can still send that to the IESG, we will still review it. But if you send may, I would like to see a bit more guidance, because I just reread the text and I think it's missing something. So I'll leave it to the working group to decide between may or must, but if it comes out as may, please work on guidance.
Yeah. Well, that's why there's a couple of open issues on this topic, because it needs more work. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next open issue. This is simply say more about signaling between two autonomic domains. So this is for the context when you're using GRASP outside a standard autonomic control plane type environment. You want to use GRASP for some purpose between two domains which don't necessarily share a security environment. And the draft just has a few words in there saying, well, you could do this. And one of Sheng's comments was we should say a bit more than that about when you could do it and how you could do it, and what its security implications would be. And Max was looking very nervous. No? Okay. So that's an open issue the authors haven't had a chance to think about yet. Again, any feedback from the working group would be exceedingly welcome.
Yeah, I think on that point, if I had a list of priorities, what's kind of borderline in scope or not, right? So I think that for the rest of the reference model and everything, we're trying to have on the first round really only simple autonomic domain and not between autonomic domains. So in the list of priorities, this would be lower than trying to figure out a good compromise for the 0.848.
Yeah.
In the reference model, I have cross-domain marked with an asterisk right now. I don't think it's that complicated either. If you have two domains and if they are supposed to work together, they need a common trust anchor.
Yeah.
So you need either a common CA or cross-signing. And then I think the thing we need to say is that this is then a TLS connection, which needs to be secured with that.
Anyway, I'll review the text, but if we just say for further study, you have to explain to our co-chair why that's right, since it was his comment. It is reflected in this open issue. Okay, next page. Yeah, that's another minor detail for rapid modes, which is probably just part of the general rapid mode discussion. You could argue that the rapid mode only really makes sense on link when you might want to do very fast packet exchanges. I think that's subsidiary to the other discussion. So there's an open issue which arrived too late to get onto the slides, which is the one we were talking about at lunchtime, which is about using Grasp for discovery during the insecure part of secure bootstrap and during the insecure part of creating the ACP. And I don't know if we should discuss that now or if we should discuss it in Max's presentation.
Max Bredican here. We added some text to that in the bootstrapping slides that are coming up next, so we will discuss it now, and that
Okay.
will be in just a couple moments. I would like to finish on the discussion you were just saying about intra-domain communication.
Yeah, sure.
I think that when Michael said using cross-sign certificates or otherwise establishing the TLS connections to Grasp, I don't think that's quite enough. We probably want to authorize the other domain to certain things, and that puts us down a rat hole of questions. I would feel more comfortable saying that maybe we do everything within one domain and we leave that completely undefined as opposed to trying to define it partially.
Okay. No, we can do that. I say you just have to convince the co-chair who made the comment that it's okay to leave it open.
I mean, I'm fine. You say, you know, that's identified future work. That will be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's out of scope in this document.
FFS in ITU terminology, I believe. Okay, so next slide, please.
Just on that point,
Yeah.
so I thought that on that last point that you mentioned, we're standing on trying to amend to the document terminology around the mode and the instances,
Yeah, there
and then
will
basically define what functionality the different
there will
modes
be
have.
some new text. Being my co-author hasn't heard that discussion, so I think, you know, after we've heard from Max, Bing and I can go away and write some text. Okay, next slide should.
Was there a conclusion on that point?
On which point?
15.
That was the rapid mode. Not really. I think I'm going to have to review the rapid mode text in view of the discussion here, and that final point may fall out in the wash, or it may still be open. I don't actually know right now. Okay, so we still need reviews of the draft. You know, we'll always need reviews of the draft. We still need people to think about implementation issues because, you know, sending a document to the ISG where only a couple of people have thought about implementation isn't really enough. So either play with my prototype code or better still, write your own, right? Because it would be much more interesting to have two independent implementations talking to each other than having one implementation talking to itself. If anybody wants to see two ASAs talking to each other, I can do that on my laptop. We don't have time now. But, you know, I know that the protocol works in a closed little world. It just needs to be tested out in a slightly larger world, I think. That's basically all I have. And accept any more questions.
When did you think you can close all those open issues?
Most of them, I think, can be closed fairly quickly after the discussion we had at lunch, which unfortunately Bing didn't hear. The first one is actually the hardest one. That's getting everybody else to validate that Grasp does what their use case or application would need. Yeah.
But you already done most of it.
Yeah.
Apart from very simple one.
No, I think the ACP
Yeah.
one is the-
Yeah, the ACP one is interesting.
Yeah, he already take it, or he will take it.
And I'd like to have a little bit more of a go at the prefix one,
Okay.
Yeah. Obviously.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is, you know, as we said, this document is already running late for the milestone. So, and also the working group classical is one of the most efficient way to get reviewers. So I would like to, you know, close the open issues That means you also done the cross-checking with all other draft.
Yeah.
Then send out the working group last call. Maybe we can see what goes from there.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
I think we can say that first one is not completely under our control. The other ones, we can do something in a few weeks, obviously.
Okay.
Maybe not this week, but maybe not next week, because everybody will be jet lagged next week. But shouldn't take too long. You agree, Bing? Yeah. You can say yes from there.
All right.
Okay. Bing is still jet lagged because he only arrived today, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So next, Max. Version 2, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so bootstrapping. Go ahead and hit the first slide. So we're going to kind of walk through some of the open issues in the document. They're all listed with endnotes. So if you search through the document, you'll see this. If you're doing a review, you would run into these as comments. A couple of these are technical details towards the end, but a couple of them are kind of bigger issues that we've gone back and forth on a lot. So perhaps we'll ask people to raise their hands or something. And mostly very much want to hear the feedback from folks who haven't been on the phone calls or off-channel discussions. So definitely provide the feedback. So we'll go through this proxy, some CoAP, and some alignment with other things, and then some security stuff, and a couple of specific field discussions. So next slide. Okay, so proxy and discovery is being discussed a lot. It's being discussed here. If you have feedback, please provide it. The current text in section 311 is around how the new entity, this new device, comes up and discovers the proxy that it needs to communicate with. And the current language around that is that it must do MDNS. There's, of course, a use case around IoT, which, as we were just talking about, is not clear what the level of scope is for that, where MDNS is already assumed in a lot of cases. And so it makes sense to say that these new devices would do that and use that to discover their local proxy. The suggestion is that the proxy must be discoverable using an insecure mode of grasp. That would imply that a new entity may, should, or if it supports grasp, then must use grasp to do that discovery. So that would imply two discovery methods. This is kind of starting to sound pretty complex and could be confusing. So simplifying that would be good. Feedback as to which direction to take, how we do that. You'll note there at the very bottom of the slide, the grasp document today hints at running in insecure mode to support this type of operation. We will need to expand that text substantially so that people can look at this text and decide whether or not they like the idea of running grasp in an insecure mode, however that's implemented, or whether they would prefer to use something like MDNS or some other discovery method. But we're a little bit in a vacuum, we're going in circles, so feedback from you guys, which is the preferred approach, would be solicited. There's the other side of discovery, which is the proxy communicating with the registrar. At this point, it's the proxy and it's in an autonomic network. Everything's up and running. The current text on that is not normative, will be discovered by in the document, but what we will change that to be is must be discoverable using secure grasp, which is to say it will use grasp to discover the registrar. So the right-hand side of that would just use grasp. And I don't expect there to be any real problems with that. So, next slide. Did you hit the next slide button? Oh, go
No, get back.
Leave it.
Just a personal feedback without my chair hat on. Personally, for the first one, I would like to use must because one of our ambitions at the beginning of the Anima working group is, whether we could do, our autonomic work with, one unique protocol. So if the grasp provides the possibility for the discovery enough, then why you have to have with another protocol which need extra support?
From the perspective of a device that's doing this communication, it requires the grasp stack on the low end device that might not be expecting to do that.
But one of the points we had is we assume later there will be more ASA or whatever the autonomic functions on those nodes, and they will use grasp. So why only Bootstrap can't use that?
And the other half of the conversation is that grasp is defined currently as running over a secure communication channel, and so what we're doing is we're now splitting grasp to say there's two ways of running it. One is an insecure mode and one is a secure mode, and how to do the distinguishing factor between those could be confusing. It might be a lot simpler and more direct on the implementation side to say grasp runs securely and this is what you do when you're insecure, which is a simple constrained discovery mechanism.
Yeah.
Part of that is to make sure that all of the stuff that a device does before it has security established is very clearly defined. It has nice edges around it. But that's exactly the discussion we've been going back and forth on, so the feedback is great.
Yeah, I think from my side, just to repeat to the room, the feedback was that these are the conclusion out of something which we feel is a nice way to show a more broader use case applicability of the Bootstrap and Anima infrastructure, that you have Anima proxy devices that can also Bootstrap devices that have no idea about Anima beyond just doing Bootstrap. And if, for example, as it seems that some of them at least like to have MDNS as the discovery, then the proxy must of course also support MDNS. But on the other hand, and I think this is this if must, was I think the full statement is if the client device itself is an Anima device, then it must use grasp to basically find the proxy, right?
Michael. So I'm going to speak to this slide, but it's effectively your slide. The current language in the proxy discussion about how the new device communicates through the proxy to communicate to the back end, again has kind of two choices that we've been kicking around a little bit, and we need the feedback. We need people to read the text and provide feedback as to which of those two choices they would prefer. So if you look in the 03 version of the document, they're both detailed in there. And clarity as to whether people prefer one or the other or like the idea that both are supported would be great. The current language does make it such that the endpoint device doesn't have to know too much about it, but the proxy has to implement a couple of different things. And we'd like to make that simpler a little bit. So right now, what happens is you must implement an IP encapsulation function if you're doing CoAP as the basic transport for all of this. So CoAP is again here where we see the IoT influence of how the devices should be communicating, which would be that they use CoAP instead of the alternative, which would be an HTTP REST interface, which would be not ideal for the smaller devices that are picking up on CoAP as their main communication channel, their main stack of software. So again, this is a case of trying to figure out what the stack of software is likely to be on certain devices and not unduly forcing the devices to implement multiple stacks. So one would be must implement an IP encapsulation function for CoAP traffic, and then they should also provide one of an IP encapsulation of HTTP traffic on a port to be determined to the registrar. And in this case, we can make sure that whether or not the device expects there to be a proxy or not, it all goes through and the device doesn't know the difference. The device has one particular behavior and the proxy has a couple of behaviors to make sure that whatever it does is transparent to the new device. Michael, you're at the mic.
I think we did agree that we were going to remove the HTTP proxy option. We decided it was useless or not interesting. And I just wanted to point out that we had a conversation about whether or not the proxy needed to have a well-known port assigned to it, and realized that no, because we have a discovery, and that can discover the port as well as the thing. So no issue there. And further, that we're using GRASP to discover the address and port on the registrar, so we don't need to have anything assigned for that either.
Okay, just to reaffirm, so I think Elliot raised the concern of us trying to get a well-known port. So the requirement now is that every discovery protocol that we want to have needs to be able to discover the IP address and the port.
I believe that's the case.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then you security folks are not concerned about raising the level of attacks by having to learn through the discovery also the port. Then I'm happy, right? Because I think then we're getting rid of this IANA allocation, and we're getting rid of multiplexing into a port 80 thing.
Yeah, you don't have to run on port 80,
Right.
and
just
you don't have to
the
get a new
security
port.
folks
Yeah.
be concerned about this, and then I think it's great. Yeah. Can I ask a question about that IP and IP? Because whoever of the two of you is responsible for that, but I'm worried about the simplicity of implementing the registrar, and if the registrar has to look into IP packets, that's a lot more work than any form of transport layer encapsulation in transport or proxying, or so. This is the least
I am
preferable
also
option
concerned
for me.
about it.
Yeah.
I'm also concerned about it in its general case. If we had Mark, got his last name now, Mr. L2TP in the room, he would tell you about the hassle of things like this. It's not that big a deal, but I then realized something that made it a lot simpler, which is that the proxy is going to actually, I was thinking, okay, so we know you need to build a machine that accepts IP packets from anywhere on the ACP and terminates it properly and does the right thing. Then I realized, wait, no, the proxy is actually going to communicate to the registrar with GRASP. So it actually knows, the registrar actually knows who's coming to it. And so actually from an ability to conveniently configure something on the registrar, you actually can do that quite easily. And then the result is that you have an IP interface that you actually can create, and you actually wind up getting link local packets on that interface. And then it's just as if you had that registrar had an interface on the registration, on the new link, okay? And anyway, it's much simpler. It turns out it's much simpler through the kernel because it's actually looking like a configured tunnel. So you actually can do that.
Why wouldn't I want to use the same thing we're using in the TLS case, which is a simple stateful per connection proxy?
Because it's a stateful proxy connection and it eats up RAM, and anybody hooking up to that wire or that Wi-Fi can chew all of your RAM.
No, I think there are simple, denial of service attack prevention schemes.
And we see this every single day at Starbucks. Anybody can screw the Starbucks router. Anybody.
But
right? I mean, it just doesn't happen because Starbucks reboots the router.
I'm pretty sure that I can find bad code implementation examples for any protocol.
And I can still spam them to the point where nobody can get a registration through. Okay, or the operator saying, oh my God, I'm not running a proxy on that machine. Oh, not that machine, not that machine, not that machine. They're all too important, right? That's my concern, is that proxy function, if it has any cost to it, is going to get turned off. That's what I'm really worried about. So I'd like to move that cost to the registrar, where we can actually we can provision it properly, and it actually is worthwhile spending the money on that state.
I like in that case the stupid telephone support model, where you have the first line of defense that gets rid of all the stupid I didn't know how to plug in the power. Okay. That's the proxy, right? If I'm overloading the registrar, it's not only that I'm inhibiting registration for somebody else on the Starbucks network, but also on other networks, right? So from that perspective, it's a good thing that the proxy may get overrun, but it protects the registrar.
If you want to write your proxy as a firewall, then that's great. But I see and experience that operators are going to just turn that off. They will say this autonomic stuff doesn't work because whenever I enable it in potentially hostile places, I can't use it.
But I mean, isn't it so much easier in terms of saying, okay, I've got a stateful proxy and it's
You want to do NAT 6.6? Let's do NAT 6.6. It's in the document. It says it right there. It says you can do it. Okay? Should provide an IP encapsulation and traffic port to the registrar, an HTTP proxy or a TCP circuit proxy. Okay? TCP circuit proxy is essentially an application layer proxy, but it's a NAT 6.6. Okay? That's already there. If you want to do that, you can do that.
Oh no, that's
Okay. And by the way, the choice of which one of these is going to be negotiated between the proxy and the registrar using GRASP. So if you build a registrar that doesn't support IP, then it's going to have to pick one of the other ones. But I'm suggesting, for the proxy's point of view, the IP is really simple to implement. So don't not implement that part on the proxy, because that's really easy. If you don't want to implement IP on your registrar, that's fine. You're just forcing the proxy to be in its should space, which it may or may not implement, so maybe it won't work. You put arbitrary two vendors together, they may not have an overlapping mandatory to implement in that case.
I mean, we do have a disagreement, I think, here on what we feel is the better solution, right? Because I'm the big fan of the TCP proxy and just put a limit on there, right? So you're not going to in parallel.
Okay,
more
let me know where you're setting that up. No, but
I mean,
let me know
the
when you
question-
send. No, I'm serious.
this
I'm
is-
serious
this is-
because it's going to get attacked.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to get attacked, and to me it seems like a very, very simple thing. You use all the sessions up,
fine,
then you're dead, right? And by the way, once you've done that, you have a very good way of essentially saying, hey, come over here to this network. This network's not blown up. Okay, so.
Yeah, I have to cut this off.
Yeah. But I think that you can have
offline.
the model that you want. It's in the document. It's not the model I want. Okay, but I don't object to you deploying your model.
No,
Okay,
I
that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
I think we can.
have. Yeah. So just as a working group chair, the question is how do we create, the most preferred must and should options here, right? Because we have many options and we need to find the mandatory minimum, which is the must, and how do we agree on them?
Right.
So, I will note that in following up on your statement as to the must and should, there is not currently normative language around the GRASP exchange to decide which one, nor the use of ACP to do that. So that's an open item, and we'll generate that language, and then we'll get that right. Next slide. So as we've noted, there's a bunch of discussion about IoT and about CoAP and to what extent that fits in here. So the current document has discussion around CoAP. We'd like to understand the interactions. We have a section 575 that talks about it very, very little, which basically says that it might exist that we go in this section. I actually think that'll be promoted to its own section if we follow that up. There is a draft where we capture our initial thoughts on this. It's a separate document we've sent out. So feedback on that as we figure that out. There is also discussions about people talking about doing the object security for CoAP, which I don't think actually applies. That's what the text under here says, because it doesn't deal with fragmentation, which we wouldn't deal with search. Which leaves us with effectively the discussion of how we would use core block to do CoAP. Those documents are out there. We totally solicit feedback.
Zalander from Ericsson. Just a question, what does this no generic support for fragmentation?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
What does it mean? There is no generic support for fragmentation.
If you look in the OSCAP document, what it says is to use codes to get a smaller object format, but it doesn't do fragmentation. So it's effectively taking the direction of we won't have as much fragmentation because we have a efficient model for how to set up the data.
No, that's not correct. So version 5 supports blockwise.
Okay, then
So you have actually two types of fragmentation. One is an endpoint to endpoint fragmentation, which is secure end-to-end. So you wrap the blocks individually, and then you have each proxy could also perform fragmentation in turn of the fragments.
fair enough. I might have looked at version 4. I'd have to check where I brought that quote from.
For the minutes, it's version 5 of COSI.
It's version 5 of OSCOA.
Of OSCOA.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll double check that. Yes. I was going down the path of trying to understand it, so it's possible. Okay, so the big question here is really, do we continue down that path and get the COAP or whether we declare that as kind of out of scope, how we deal with that. So for right now, that work exists, and you can see the document around it if you want to provide more detailed feedback. And next slide. Okay, so when the registrar contacts the MASA server, the vendor service, it needs to know which vendor service to contact. And we don't currently have a mechanism defined for knowing which one. You could fall back on a static configuration. I bought devices from these vendors. I know that those devices have this MASA service at this URL, and I configure that on the registrar. You could also get that information dynamically from the IDEV ID if you use something like the MUD extensions to do so. And so we would add effectively a reference into MUD or something similar to MUD, effectively saying the location of the MASA service or the vendor cloud service is identified in the certificates from the endpoint device, which allows you to dynamically go and talk to it with no configuration on the registrar. There are ways to provide a little privacy. I'm not going to talk about that right now. So there is a note about that. Do we include that in scope, or do we say that's out of scope and the configuration of that is not part of bootstrapping, which would allow us to effectively wash our hands of it and get the document done sooner, one way or the other? Again, I'll solicit feedback and keep going.
You just referenced to a individual draft?
That is currently just a draft, yes. So a reference to it would probably mean, depending on, I don't know if Elliot's in the room, either bringing out the pieces we needed or finding a normative reference.
Hello again. So MUD's going to come up tomorrow at the Ops Area Working Group. My intent, at least my hope, is that we can get it adopted as a working group draft there. The nice thing about MUD is that we are going ahead and doing the extension to 802.1 AR. That's in the draft, and there are a couple of other ways to get this to get information as well. And the idea basically being, this is a good hint for how you get to the MASA server. If you need another way, you know, like static configuration or something like that, you can do that, but this is a good way to do it in an automated fashion.
Elliot, do you think that a reference to you may get it from the AR if it's available without identifying how, and then saying it can be statically configured would be sufficient for this document?
Well, I think so. I think the thing is that if you are able to, I think if you're able to use the certificate to retrieve this information, then that's better. But I mean, if it's not there, then you have to do something else.
I think what I would suggest would be find a language for that, but want to not have this document hold up based on the status of MUD when we get to.
I mean, what I would say is, let's see where we are in, after the meeting, because if MUD does get adopted, then life is good and we move forward.
Yeah. I'm also, the same opinion here. I'm fine with you to keep that for now, but I don't think you want to, hold your document, until that document published. So, yeah.
Right. So we'll have to figure that out. Okay. So next one. Okay. So when we request an audit token from the MASA, there's a known threat, which is that the registrar is not known to the MASA server. In the current document, there's nothing that indicates that the vendor cloud knows and understands every customer that has bought one of those devices and can authenticate them, because that's a very hard problem. I'm going to let the CA vendors figure it out. There's no way to bootstrap off of it, so we're just stuck. So What we have is a potential denial of service attack where rogue registrars, meaning fake customers, could go beat on this massive server. There are a set of existing mitigations. You could know what your customers are and know, and certainly if you did that, that's a benefit to you. You have nonce checks and log consolidations, which prevent too much havoc, but could leave a hole. There is an option of enforcing proof of possession, which is to say, I refuse to talk to you unless you can prove that you have one of my devices that you're actually trying to register. That would require an entire new round trip. If we want to put that in, if we want to put it in optionally.
To the new device.
To the new device, all the way to the new device. It would be an entire round trip from the new device all the way up to the cloud. The cloud would have to effectively generate a nonce or have to send down to the device and tell the device, prove that you're there right now, sign this nonce and get it back to me. It would be a simple example of that round trip. So that would take some time and some effort. Not effort to write the protocol for it, but some effort on the endpoint device for the crypto operation and the time for that round trip, et cetera. I would definitely like to see feedback on that section.
Michael Berenger, clarification question. The additional round trip is only necessary for freshness, right? Because you could already, at Bootstrap beginning, you could sort of have a token from the new device.
Yeah, certainly you could, it's for freshness. So if you tried to force something like a time-based mechanism or something like that, you'd have to define how the device got and knew the time, et cetera. But yes, you're right. You might be able to do something like that. The point is that we don't include anything like that right now. So if people are concerned about this potential attack against that cloud service, now's the time to provide feedback and say, let's put that message in. Next slide. So the audit token response right now is encapsulated in effectively CMS message. This is because it needs to go through the customer site and be validated by the new device. The mechanism for that would be, for example, a signed message using the CMS message format. But right now, the new device does not do CMS or large parsing of large 802. Large parsing of ASN1. So this is a potential pit hole for the device. It has to have a bunch of ASN1 code to be able to parse this this message. An alternative would be to do something like the JSON web signature. So we have a decision point. Do we be more consistent with kind of the PKI space and what's going on there and lean towards that? Or do we try and have as least dependence on the ASN1 PKI and say we're going to do a JSON signature, a JSON web signature?
Yes, curious, Johan Selander from Ericsson. Have you considered COSI? Using the CBOR object signing and encryption?
Sorry, I know I jumped to the web server. I meant effectively that space though.
Okay, thanks.
I'm happy to put something in there. I kind of meant that space.
Right.
Dan Harkins, how does the new entity get the master servers certificate?
It's actually, the new entity has it from manufacturing. So the master server certificate is effectively from the vendor. So you're effectively verifying something the way you would a new image distribution, something like that.
But the installed trust anchor is like the CA cert, right? Not the master server cert.
Yes, it's the CA cert for the manufacturer, right?
But the audit token response is not signed with that, the key that's in the trust anchor.
No, it would have to be a chain of trust, which all of that is fully supported in CMS,
Okay.
and I don't know what level it is in the JWS.
Okay.
So but there's a point what you just said. The point is that if there's a chain of trust that it has to verify, then it probably needs some ASN GUI in there to do that. And therefore, it may not be so terrible to stick to more CMC as much as I don't want any GUI. Do you have an opinion about which the format is? Because I was hoping you would.
No. If you're doing CMC, then you're already dealing with ASN.1 GUI, right?
Yeah, CMS is what we meant to say, but yeah. You're doing PKI certs and you're doing validation certs. So you're doing some ASN1 GUI. You're not necessarily doing.
EST is also ASN1 GUI.
for portions of it, but the point of S was that you avoid CMS. So you can do it with just the simpler PKI messages, not the full CMS. The current language says CMS, and I'm reasonably happy with it for my use cases, but this is something I expect people to push back on. So, okay. So at the end of this exchange, where we end, and this is the point that Dan was just hinting at, where we end is having received this message and verified it, we now know the CA of my local domain. What do we do next? The current text rolls into an enrollment exchange to get a certificate, but that's optional, and it's structured that way. So if you look at the document, it clearly distinguishes when the bootstrapping protocol ends and when you roll into your enrollment exchange. It reuses the same TLS connection. There's a lot of efficiency with that, pretty handy, but you could do other things here. And so we don't have a real normative statement about kind of how bootstrapping ends and how you do your transition. Do we enforce that you do a full certificate enrollment? Do we say you have a trust anchor and now you must go build an ACP? What? There's no language about that. So provide feedback, please. Next.
Yeah, I think that kind of being able to build a working Anima device, I think given how we're not having other documents we can put it, we should make sure that between ACP and Brewski document, we have these steps, right? In Anima, we want to have a certificate, so I would think logically it belongs there. I think that the main challenge we have is that we would like to make the Bootstrap document also reusable in environments that don't do full ACP, so we'll have to figure out where we put that text, but so the fact that must do, if it's an Anima device, must do certificate enrollment needs to go into either of the drafts.
I'm happy with that. Okay. And so I'm happy with that language. I want to draw people's attention to it. Yeah, for sure. So next slide. So after we finish the kind of bootstrapping part, we just roll into a normal EST enrollment exchange to get the device a certificate on the local domain. The getting the CA certs is pretty clear. There's no real important piece there. What we do today is we mandate calling what was optional in EST, which is the CSR attributes. I'll talk about that next slide. Then we do enrollment, and we have telemetry about the enrollment being successful or not, which in our case, where you don't have an operator on the device, is really useful. In the EST PKI enrollment, they didn't really have that sort of concept. So we've added that. So here's a couple of extensions to EST. They're carved out and clearly extensions, but they're mandated right now in this document if you were doing this enrollment exchange. So effectively for Anima, we're saying, do these extra things that are very important to Anima. Next slide.
Yeah, and maybe just as an example, we had in the real world challenges with the client devices clocks, right? So you got a certificate, but you really felt unhappy about it. And this is what we, through the diagnostics, would be able to recognize.
Yeah. So I'm going to point out around that CSR attributes. So what's the deal with that? What this is doing is it's informing the new entity the proper fields to include inside of its certificate request. And this is intended in EST and in kind of the PKI space. This is intended to allow the PKI to request from the device something that the infrastructure can't know in advance, like what's your MAC address so I can put it inside of your certificate. In Anima, this enters into a discussion of what are all the details of the fields that we want inside of Anima certificates so that we can use them when we establish the ACP connections for authorization checks and that sort of thing. So in Anima, we're saying we have to have these certain things inside of a certificate. Those will be described in the ACP document, probably in section 511 of the ACP document. If we're doing GRASP discovery, by the way, we'll have some discussion of I discover a service using GRASP. Does the device that I discovered, is it actually the right device? In most other cases where you do discovery and then make a secure connection to that thing, you have a RFC 6125 style authorization check. Are we going to integrate that? That would imply that we need something like the service ID in these certificates. So those are a couple things that could be in these certificates. And then there's the, the straight ACP values that we want in there. We can communicate those to the new entity via the CSR attributes response. So if we mandate the device does CSR attributes, then we can push back and tell the node, use these values in your CSR. The only alternative in the PKI space would be to otherwise tell the registrar it has to use
the full CMC. So if we don't do this, we're telling the registrar it has to do a whole bunch more work on the back end.
Michael Richardson. I don't think any of us said our names at the mic. Maybe Elliot, Dan. Yeah, okay. I didn't. I don't remember. I guess if we're just discussing grasp discovery, I think it's important to remember that that discovery was not only insecure, but public. I don't think there's anything that we should put in there that, other than I am a proxy, and perhaps something like a hash of a domain ID. And the reason is because you might discover 5 or 6 proxies from domain A, discover that's not the network you're looking for. And therefore it would be good to then go to a proxy from domain B, because that would be smarter, assuming you're not malicious and the networks are not malicious. That would be better to not try. Of course, the first proxy from domain A might not have really been from domain A, and you should eventually try the other proxies from domain A, but you might as well try one from domain B, but you have to recognize who they are, right? So that makes sense to me, but I think there's nothing else I think that we can say in the grasp reply about what goes into the certificate.
You can say whether it was a proxy within the domain, which is effectively what you're getting at. And
Yes,
that's-
but I don't know how that goes into the CSR
it's not into the CSR so much in this CSR, it's into the CSR that the proxy or the registrar did to say whether or not it would be responding to these requests. When somebody requests a certificate, they're effectively saying, I'm going to provide this service later on via discovery, via insecure discovery mechanisms. I need something that allows the responder on the discovery to verify that I'm really doing that thing, or was allowed to do that thing.
Okay, so let me maybe back up again and ask, because I maybe didn't understand since lunchtime.
We didn't talk about this.
Yeah, no, we didn't talk about, but I don't think we became obvious that we would have this. So you're saying when the proxy was talking grasp to the registrar.
When the proxy was bootstrapping,
Yes,
it
itself.
needed to get a certificate that indicated it was a proxy.
That it could be a proxy.
Or when the registrar
Yeah.
was bootstrapping itself. Or whatever.
Right. So, but that would imply that the proxy is going to do something with its certificate in the grasp, the insecure grasp
In
discovery.
every case that we talk about issuing a certificate, it is with the assumption that they're going to use that certificate to do something else. The fields that we put inside of the certificate are useful for the authorizations of whatever the heck they're going to do with
I
the
agree.
certificate.
I agree. And the proxy in its other role as digital signage and lighting controller for this room, okay, could very well need to use its certificate, right? But I'm just not sure that I understand beyond that. Yes, it joined this domain and it received some abstracted, domain identifier. Abstracted, because I don't think we wanted to say IETF96.org, right? So I really came up to ask about the last point, right? And I think that the last point.
Before we move on to that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
do you have
Yeah, I was sort of getting a little bit confused about your notion of the
Okay.
use. Sorry, it's Elliot again. I was getting a little confused about your use of a hash to identify the domain, with the assumption that somehow the proxy will be able to intelligently decide which domain it likes in advance. And
proxy, the new node.
Even the new node, the new node's even worse in this regard, I think, right? So the question I had for you, Michael, was how is it that you would expect that new node to make a decision based on the hash? Maybe I misunderstood your point, though.
So I'm assuming the proxy is properly enrolled in the domain and it's not doing anything. It has no malicious intent. It truly, the proxy for the IETF domain truly wants to enroll IETF members, and therefore,
How does it know that?
well, it's how does the proxy know? It's because it came through its autonomic function. Okay, it's been told. And by the way, you can be a proxy in this thing. And by the way, you're part, you figured out you're part of the IETF domain and then, okay, for proxy. So the new node, the pledge is coming along and he does a grasp discovery. This is several slides back, of course, and he gets a bunch of responses.
Right.
Okay. One of them is from the IETF proxy in that screen. Another was from the IETF proxy in that screen. Okay. One was from Brian Carpenter forging the IETF proxy. Okay. And finally, there was Dan Harkins in the back, who's actually announcing the Cisco. He's not Cisco anymore.
Can I, can I interject? Gentlemen,
Sorry.
Can I interject into this conversation? It's not, a fake proxy is handled by the NASA server and all the stuff that bootstrapping does.
Right.
What we're concerned about here is if bootstrapping, I mean, if discovery via grasp is an unsecured method, which it might be, then we need some mechanism of securing that discovery when it happens later on between whatever else things can be discovered on a network, which implies a field inside of the certificates, which needs to be transmitted during this portion of the enrollment.
I think you're confusing it by this situation by talking about proxy.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
that's
want
what I think.
to erase the discussion of
Right.
proxy. This
So
is really
it's
just about.
the new pledge needs to have attributes in its certificate which has something to do with its capabilities, such that later on it can be authenticated with it. And that's really about what the third point is about. Okay.
Right.
And so the third point, I think what I understood about it was that unfortunately the state of the protocols is that if we want to use the reduced CMC, that we don't get the right messages.
Correct.
And therefore we're pushed into using a more complicated protocol to get that messages.
Right.
And this seems like a rock in a hard place.
Yep.
And so I was actually hoping Dan or someone else who has more experiences with these things would come and tell us what we should do.
Dan's opinion on.
But wait a second, none of this is impacting our ability of quicker finding a better proxy, right?
No, this is totally beyond that discussion.
Right.
This is purely when the device goes to enroll. What, do we want the device to put into its credential request exactly everything it needs? And what exactly does it need in there, which is important to us because we don't have, right now, we don't have the ACP language. We don't know exactly what goes into the certificate. So it's difficult for us to say at this point whether these are all appropriate to cram into the CSR attributes or whether we want to force the registrar to be able to modify the request, which gets us into a world of hurt in the PKI space. So where do we straddle that line?
No, I thought that we have in the ACP draft now the attributes that basically the registrar would send down to the client device about what we need for the ACP. And hopefully we also have the language in the bootstrap.
And I asked the question about the grasp as to whether there's anything we need for grasp.
No,
Now
what
that we know
could we even
those,
do
I
for
agree
grasp?
that the current language is that we push it down via CSR attributes.
Okay, but I don't even understand what the discussion about grasp and the certificate is. I don't know how they would ever come together. That I don't.
Grasp allows you to find a service via discovery.
Mhm.
And then when you go, don't worry about proxy. Think some other service. Name a service that Grasp allows you to do. Service X. So I can go to Grasp and I can say, where is service X? And I will get back via Grasp the host I'm supposed to contact for that. Grasp runs in insecure mode, so I'm not going to trust the Grasp can run in unsecure mode in some cases. So I'm not going to trust that response necessarily. I would like some way of verifying that I've got the right thing, which is the way TLS works the world over as per RFC 6125. So I would like to verify something in the credential, and all I was asking is there a field that we would want to put there to indicate that this is the service that a device can offer?
Right.
Or do we wash our hands? We could make a statement here that says, once the device is up and running, Grasp must be used in secure mode at all times. So we only use in secure mode during the bootstrapping piece and never for service discovery later on.
So right now in the scope of the charter items, I don't think we have defined how two enrolled devices would use Grasp outside the ACP.
Okay.
Right? So that is certainly an interesting thing to do after rechartering. And that's maybe when that type of point comes in.
That's a great response. So we will avoid this problem by sticking with it in the insecure mode. That's fine. Okay.
Laurent Chavalia, just to react to what you mentioned, tell us about the charter. I'm not sure it's actually specify that grass should be used in ACP, because at the time of the charter, grass was not existing. And so I agree that it may be the outcome of the working group work, but I don't think it's written like this in the charter.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I was overstating how it does relate to the charter, but I thought to the framework of how these things interact. And
I would like to propose that we write text to the effect that says, if there are additional attributes required in a pledges certificate that become known autonomically, that the new member, because they're now a member, they have a domain certificate, will request a new certificate with the new correct attributes at that point. And that we should write that in the Bootstrap document, because that not just makes it out of scope, but it actually tells it, it's not just saying it's not our problem, but it tells people whose problem it then becomes.
I like that.
Okay, I'll write that in the minutes.
Great, thank you. Okay, Kent left because we're running a little behind schedule, but the idea was that there's some ownership voucher integration that we need to finish up. I think we're all on the same page, but didn't get that into this version of the draft. Anything else that's basically a generic call for saying, hey, please provide feedback, read the document. And we have had some proof of concept implementations, and the guidance from that helped clarify on the 03 version of the document, but we want to finish those up so that we can, as we push in towards the next phase, because your next question is going to be, when is this going to be done? And I will say that it's not going to be till after August that those proof of concept things are done. So I'm not going to feel comfortable saying that we get more than the open issues that we have here addressed in that time frame, and then feedback from the implementers.
Also, I'm asking you to get more reviewers and get their comments in the mailing list publicly.
From now on, if anybody sends me comments directly, I'm going to move it to the mailing list. So,
Okay. Thank you.
But please send them in.
Yeah. Michael? Michael, we don't have enough time for both, so I will recommend you to do reference model today, then move the ACP to Thursday. Yeah.
Carry on. Okay, thanks. So this is the next version of the reference model. Next slide, please. Just as a quick reminder where we are in the overall scheme, what it looks like. This is a recap from previous. I'm too small.
No.
Okay. Does this work now? Can you hear me in the back?
Test, 1, 2, 3.
But now I'm really close to the mic. Anyway, so this is the high-level view. We have the infrastructure. We have autonomic functions on top. There has been some discussion on how ASA and autonomic function relates. I thought that was clarified, but there's still some open debate there. That's formalities. Yeah, just as a reminder. Next slide, please. So one of the big things is we sort of high-level conceptually understand what an ASA is and how it is being used, but we have not formalized the mechanism of an ASA in its lifetime. And Laurent and Pierre have done a lot of work on that already in previous projects, so they have brought this in here. The key observation is the ASA is sort of code that you move onto the network at the beginning. Later, you update that code. It's sort of an independent code base that you can bring onto the network. And so anybody can write an autonomic function, not just a device vendor. So it could be an integrator, it could be an end user. Anybody can write an autonomic function. And for that reason, we need a way to instantiate an autonomic service agent, which is an atomic component of an autonomic function on a node, start it, stop it, and control it basically. And so Pierre has written a section here on the lifecycle management, which describes 3 states or 3 state transitions more: install, deploy, control. Read that section, please, for more comments. Okay. Next slide. Next change, the naming section. The original version of that was suggesting naming schemes, and we had changed that quite a lot. At the end, basically, we are not specifying a naming scheme in here, but we just say there should be a consistent naming scheme that is used within an autonomic domain. It should be consistent, obviously, and it's typically assigned by a registrar. It's probably in the same moment when you assign the ACP address to a node, you also assign a name to the node. It should be persistent, where persistent is defined as until you reset the device to factory defaults and it goes through the bootstrap process again. Michael.
So I just want to add that this is the type of attribute that we were just discussing 2-3 minutes ago,
Right.
in case anyone wasn't clear on that.
Yes. And so we suggest a very simple default naming scheme. You see that at the bottom here. Again, this is not prescriptive. Anybody can do what they want essentially on here as long as it's consistent. But since it's the registrar assigning it, there's a register part and then a device number would give you a very simple naming scheme for that. Okay, next slide, please. Intent distribution. So number 1, intent distribution is for the next revision of this working group. So it is marked with an asterisk now. It should have been marked with an asterisk before. Don't know why we missed it. The whole thing is pretty much a rewrite of what we had there before. There has been a lot of discussions on how we distribute intent. I think we do not understand at the moment how intent should look. Supa and others are looking at intent. So what intent precisely is certainly still in flux. The distribution will eventually be part of the autonomic networking infrastructure. So this is one important observation. So the autonomic service agents then should receive the intent that they need. Right? And intent can be sliced and diced or could be sliced and diced in many ways. The suggestion here is intent is one big blob. It gets flooded everywhere, and that big blob comes in sections as it pertains to certain autonomic functions. In other words, you will write intent like autonomic function, address management. Here's the high-level policy. Autonomic function, whatever enrollment, here are the high-level policies. And simply because that's the most practical way to pass on the intent to a particular ASA that runs on a particular autonomic node. Now, the discussion we have had is you can optimize this in 150 different ways. And my argument all the way through is let's keep that for now as simple as we possibly can. Keep it one blob. Do not allow for updating bits separately. Only allow to update the entire intent. Make an assumption this changes only very infrequently, i.e. not within seconds, not within minutes or hour, more in the days or weeks or months even. If intent is really a high-level policy, it's not going to change in minutes. It's going to change once a day maximum, right? So I don't think we really need to optimize on the transmission of it, neither of the format. Just send the whole block down, right? And flood it to every node. One other discussion was, should we not have ways to say the intent concerning the wireless network should only go to the wireless access points? Yes, that may be a nice optimization at some point. I do not personally believe that we can justify that right now. So again, keep it very, very simple for now. One blob, flood everywhere. And every node extracts which part pertains to it. Okay, any comments on that? Because that does anybody have a big headache on that?
Actually, since you already mentioned intent and some work from other working group, I would say, the word of intent is actually overused a lot. Different people has different meaning of intent. So, but in this, in Anima working group, we actually only target the autonomic network, which is one very specific type of network. So, for that sense, I also like the intent. If we are going to work on that, to be limited to one of the specific instance of it, like Anima instant, not a generic instant. That may be a subset of generic intent work from other working group or whatever. I don't mind, but here we are going to do Anima intent if that's going to be mentioned. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So are you suggesting that we might use a more specific term, kind of wherever, because I think we have a couple of places in the draft, in the charter items, we're saying this may be changed through intent to basically give us an escape path when the default behavior we're describing is not good. And so are you worried that intent might be confused, and we're saying through Anima intent, and we're using, is that what's concluded? Yeah.
Yeah. Super is defining an intent language, I believe, right? And that may not correspond with what we have in mind.
Yes.
There are people that think intent should define all sorts of low-level parameters in the network, right? So there are all sorts of different understandings. At the end, we need to make a call here and say, to us, intent means X. What I hope will happen, and I'm looking with big eyes at John here, what I hope will happen is that Super or anybody else defines a big framework, and we can grab a subset of that and just say,
subset.
We'll take this part, right? That's what I hope will happen, but I'm not clear about that either.
Yeah. I have a couple of comments. To my knowledge, SUPA is not chartered anymore to define intent or declarative policy. It has been ruled out of scope. There may be people continuing with draft, but just to clarify, the second point is in the Anima draft, I think do intent draft, we try to come to a term Anima intent policy to be a bit more specific. Maybe at the end we will change completely the term and use a goal or whatever, but we try to be a bit more specific. And final comment is that I agree with you, Shane, that there is intent use everywhere recently, but the thing is that it's a concept that can be at different levels, and we need at some point in Anima to understand the boundaries we want to set to that, because it may be a user inject a policy. Is it part of the scope we want to handle in Anima or not? Or it's just that we get the outcome of this user intent, and then, I mean, where we start to consider intent as in scope of Anima? Is it, for instance, the network operator that is defining intent to operate the network, or is it also some user, customer intent that can be injected?
I think it's the operator.
We need to clarify this.
Because it is the operator, because intent defines or controls the way how the network is operated. And so it's an operator thing. John.
John Strassner. So I agree with pretty much everything that Michael said and what Laurent said, except for one tiny little thing. But even before that, you're right, SUPA is not chartered to do declarative policy right now. That requires a rechartering of SUPA. The SUPA model, however, has abstractions in it that would facilitate that, but we're not working on purely declarative right now. In terms of, you know, intent distribution as part of the ANI, God, I hope so. Changing infrequently, God, I hope so. Who's going to define it? It's really meant for the operator. I mean, I guess you could make a case for an end user doing that. That's a little bit scary if an end user is going to start doing autonomic operations. So I'd rather explicitly limit it to the operator. It's their network anyway. the only thing that I really, and blah, 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 right? The only thing that I'm still a little bit nervous about is flooding. But when we met the last time, I do believe that you're correct. It was our consensus that it's the simplest to do right now. And, you know, if this is -02 of the draft, you know, so I think we have plenty of time to optimize that if we need optimization. But keeping it simple, I think, is the right thing to do.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Good. So the intent section got shortened quite a bit in this version as well, because it is out of this charter currently. Yeah, some references. So this is basically the bits and pieces, right? Some reordering, editorial changes. Have a look at the diff, and here is the so the whole thing is. Yeah, I wanted to bring this up again. The adjacency table is the thing that holds it all together in my view. This may need rewriting as well, Brian, because right now there is one adjacency table, and in my original view, when I wrote this first time, every function fed into the adjacency table. So you would do discovery, link local discovery. You discover, you see here link local address, a link address. You feed that into it. As you learn more about the node, you will add more to it. Now, if we have to separate insecure from secure and separation of data structures, this does not make sense anymore, right? And so that would need some change, which I have not thought through yet. Right? But if we go down with insecure grasp, then this is certainly something we need to look at. In the adjacency table, and the observation is even more true if we go for a discovery cache. You just observe what you see, what is being claimed without actually making any judgment on it. This is what I have seen, and the subsequent steps will then validate it. Next slide, please. The feeding, we have several. The discovery, that's where the discussion earlier was on MDNS versus GRASP or both. And some other methods. I don't think we need to go into details here. And using the adjacency, that to me is still an important part. This describes how an autonomic network glues together. I see on one, I am enrolled, I see on the other side a non-enrolled device, I will offer that device to enroll on my network. I see a device that is in the same domain and has a certificate and I can validate, I will try to establish the ACP. And we can, with intent later, modify that behavior. We don't need to do this right away, but with intent, we can say, for example, to the question that came up earlier, cross-domain, we could have an intent that says, believe the other domain X for everything to do with BGP. And that would then set a security level sort of by saying, yes, I normally would not build an ACP to the other domain, but for that particular objective, I can talk to that domain.
A quick question. I don't remember if it's written in the draft yet, but where is stored this adjacent table? Is it in each node? Is it for each ASA or?
Yes. So this is really the behavior of a node. And I also clarified some text. Thanks for bringing that up. I also clarified the text a little bit. There is section 5, I believe. It's now called the behavior of a node. This is what an autonomic node does. And the adjacency table is really the core of it.
So this is shared by all the ASA. Have no specific view on this, or is it a shared table? I mean, is there any isolation?
This is
maybe discuss more.
How ASAs have access to that is a good question.
Okay, we can take it offline.
Yeah.
I have an opinion. I don't think they should be let near it, except for the infrastructure support ASAs, which might be a little bit special, right? Because they might actually, for example, if we model the ACP creation as an ASA, right? It needs this stuff by definition, so there'll be some exceptions. But if it's managing, allocation of radio channels, it shouldn't need to know this stuff.
As long as GRASS gives us the way, tell all my neighbors X.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
and you have that, right? So if you have that, you don't need the detailed access to the table.
And you shouldn't, because linked local addresses should never be exported because, you know, they are meaningless, you know, off the link.
But the ASA runs on the same device. so-
Yeah, but you have to be very careful that you only export to the neighbors on a particular link addresses that are relevant to that link, right? Where if you've got 6 links into your machine, right, you have to be very careful that you don't send information about linked local addresses on one link to a neighbor on another link.
I would say we follow the RRCs for link local. And that
Yeah,
would
and I
be
don't
covered.
trust the average ASA writer to do that.
Okay.
No, but I think the challenge, for example, would be write an ASA that runs on every node and creates an overlay topology that follows the underlay, right? So I think when we figured out that for Grasp, then I think we can let go of knowing this stuff. But I'm not sure that we have all the information through the API yet, do we? Probably not, because we only need it for ASAs later on, and so.
But also that is something that ought to go into the reference model, that ASAs should not have access to that table. That's actually a very good comment. Michael, can you please put that in the notes?
That ASAs don't need to know what the adjacencies.
Should not know. Right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, because that ought to be covered in the reference draft.
Yeah, Michael, just now you're talking a lot about, you know, how involve intent. So I don't think you want to, you know, I don't think you can do that until we, as working group, working on the intent draft. But the intent draft is not in the charter yet. So if you want to finish your reference model, you know, for this charter, with the right milestone, you probably want to leave the intent behaviors out.
I think we have that marked with an asterisk. And one of the things we discussed last time, and I haven't done it yet. Oh no, it was not last time. It was on the mailing list. One of the proposals was that we take all the asterisk section and put it into a separate section altogether, or even into an appendix. With that, we'd be fine. I think I can't see a problem with that. I have hesitated a little bit, I must say, because some of those asterisk sections are, for example, in the security section. Some are in other sections. There is a flow, there's a logical structure to the document. If we put all of that into one section, then it is in a time fashion correct, but in a reference section fashion, it becomes more complicated.
No, actually, what I say is not how you organize the draft yet. Is that we are not understand, you know, intent yet. We haven't, you know, reached the convergence on intent topic yet. I don't think we can do that until sometime next year. So before that, we want to submit reference model to ISG. So you must find a way, you know, how to avoid, you know, unconvergent intent to finish the reference model.
Well, read again how it's written. I think all of those sections are written in a way that that says essentially at some point we will do intent. This is what it is going to be about, but we don't say anything more specific about it.
Yeah, sure. I'll do review probably, hopefully in August, but don't count on me on August, maybe September.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I thought we tried to find the best compromise between the reference model only specifying what we have as charter items, and then also being somewhat complete with respect, because in the charter items we are referring to, okay, we think we found the best, you know, default behavior, but we're not really sure it works everywhere, so let's just have the escape path. This can be changed by intent. So that's kind of happening through the charter document. So from that perspective, I think it's good when the reference document can find the best solution of exactly having, you know, one clearly understood part, which is describing what the charter items do today, and then, you know, as we said, as little as necessary to describe the things we understand are needed beyond that. And intent obviously is one, and I think that the current, you know, compromise that we found with the AD was making this with the star marks, and whatever the best format is, I think we can
convert it into that, if it's not that.
John Strassner. So first, I'm doing a formal, detailed review of the reference model, and I'll publish results to the list. I'd encourage other people to do so as well. Second, I think that if one solution to the dilemma, because I actually like the current organization of the reference model, right? Because it flows well. But one solution could be referencing an appendix or separate or several appendices, because then you get the future stuff that isn't chartered out of the actual text.
Yeah.
Just as thought.
Yeah, that was one of the proposals we discussed on the list, and I was about to do it, and then I saw it would essentially break the flow. And so, for example, there are 2 asterisk sessions in the security section. Now it makes a perfectly nice flow, and all the discussions that you have when you are a security guy are in one section, and they are marked, right? They are not out of. So in a way, I like that. But yeah, at the end, we just have to take a pick and go with it.
We can work on this with our ideas.
It's not either way will work.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the ASA section does need a rework. And what I think is we need to also together all of the involved drafts and look at what that would look like specifically with the grasp draft. What do we actually need to cover in there? Right now, it is very high level. We do want more information on how an ASA is running on a node. And I think that is partially on the ACP. No, it's not on the ACP draft. No, it's not covered right now. So that you install that, it's in user land. All of this description, I think, is not in a document right now, right?
Well, I think between the ACP and the Bootstrap, we basically need to specify the behavior of the registrar, and I guess we're trying to call it the Bootstrap ASA because enrollment is just the certificate part, so the new Brewski stuff is more Bootstrap, so I think that would be the right name. And I think the normative text there will be between ACP and Brewski, and you can basically have reference text for that. I think you already have it fairly well, except for the name, maybe.
Yeah. So maybe what we should try to do is what.
Bootstrap ASA, and we need to document on that. Is that what you said?
We are documenting the behavior of the proxy and the registrar in the Bootstrap draft, and we're starting to have the details that are missing in the Bootstrap draft that are ACP specific in the ACP draft. We should basically make the terminology consistent that we consider these to be ASAs.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I always think Bootstrap is one ASA. It's pretty special one because we want that from the very beginning. But that's one of ASA.
Yeah, and it has always been in the reference draft. We always put it in as a special ASA, right? Which is much better as it was at the very beginning, where it was a function of the autonomic infrastructure. Much easier this way, because that allows me to make statements like I made earlier today. We could actually just put that into user land, so to speak. The decision which protocol to run could be a user land decision, and I think that's quite elegant.
Michael Richardson. But I want to be clear on what you just said, or I think what Sheng just said. When you talk about the Bootstrap process is always considered to be an ASA, what I believe we concluded some time ago was that the decision to become a registrar was not an autonomic decision.
Correct.
That we couldn't do that. So the registrar was, in the beginning there was the registrar, and then the registrar created the Bootstrap ASA, and then there were proxies, and then there were new nodes. That's the biblical take on it, right? So we couldn't assume that part could pull it up from its bootstrap. Someone had to do it. But I heard a little bit something different, and I just want to be clear that it's not what I heard.
No, I think you're right with respect. How do we define what can be classified as an ASA? And you've got a point that we have not figured out how to not manually configure registrar.
Right, and I think we decided 2 IETFs ago that we would stay with that situation that the registrar could not be autonomically created.
But can we then not call it an ASA? I think that's the naming question.
That's the point. That's why I was surprised when you said, oh, it's an ASA. I went, well,
Okay, now, let's say we are mostly referenced to the client side.
right, the proxy, of course, can talk to the Bootstrap ASA running on the registrar to discover that where the registrar is, right?
Okay.
That could be part of that ASA. That makes sense to me. And we actually, I think, should write that up as a separate document.
Why does this shock you? Why do you not like the registrar?
It wasn't something you said, it was something he said.
No, but I don't understand it, because to me, an ASA does not mean that I can't put some config on there.
No, I think for most ASA, you would be the one that vehemently opposes doing that. You would like ASAs to only receive intent.
Yes.
So now basically
Sorry.
registrar.
So the proxy could say, hey, I'm looking for a registrar, and something could say, I can't see one. I will become one. And that was the discussion that we had about, well, no, wait, that's not going to work. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not saying.
I mean, actually, we never say autonomic network is, the opposite of manual configuration. Some part of the autonomic network has to be set up manually. Some part.
Max Bracken, I'm not seeing anything in the text language that indicates that an ASA couldn't be manually launched, which is what we're
Yeah.
getting at. So to me, I just assumed that some of them would be manually launched. The rest might be autonomic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I actually suggest we do is that while we are still here, we get into around the table and haggle out a little bit what needs to go where and which draft, because there are still quite a few things that certificate format, where the discovery protocol should be specified. There's a whole bunch of things that we just need to nail down once and for all. So let's find some time.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the discussion already we had. My feeling on this one here, bring everything into a single section. I'm backpedaling. I had actually originally said this is a good idea. I do not think this is a good idea anymore. I think I would prefer the current format with the asterisks.
I mean, you can have as many appendix section as you want. They don't
As many?
appendix sections.
Right, but the point is, we have a security section, and there's some stuff in security that's in scope. There's some scope that's out of scope. But if you want to know about security and autonomic network, you have everything in one section, and I like that. As long as it's clearly marked, I personally prefer that. But if you tell me to do otherwise, I will not cry.
We'll talk with RAD.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, but I think, in general, anybody who's reviewing the reference draft would be nice to,
Yes.
basically get feedback, because I think Michael makes the argument readability over, working group politics or so, right? Right. So, and let's get that feedback, and then I think we'll discuss it with the AD. I wanted just to get back to the previous one. So, are you maybe just reinforcing in the text this thing that an ASA should normally not manually be started, but it can be, or something? What the
All of
conclusion
this needs to go
was?
in the text. It's not in
Yeah.
there right now.
Right.
Right.
But basically, this discussion between Max and Michael, that we can still call the registrar an ASA, even though it's one of the few ones that would be manually started and
This is
configured. It's not
section 7.2 of the document describes the ASA life cycle, and we need to be clear that that includes some manual provisioning of ASAs. It's not clear, it doesn't exclude it either.
Right. Okay, we have that. Next slide. Yes, this is a detail, but that discussion popped up actually last week or so. What actually is the relationship? People confuse that a lot. People talk only about ASAs when they mean autonomic functions. So to recap, what I originally meant is the autonomic function is across a network. It may contain different autonomic pieces, atomic pieces you could call them, and those pieces are the autonomic service agents. So to me, the best example is the overall autonomic function of device enrollment contains 3 different autonomic service agents: the new device agent, the proxy agent, the registrar agent. And I think on that level, we are more or less in agreement, or most of us, I think. A few more details on can there be more, and need to be formalized, nothing big.
John Strassner. I think the way that you're using ASA and AF in the draft is correct, but I think that it conflicts with both 7575 and with some other people's thinking. So this is probably a longer discussion. Maybe we can do it in the side note, but basically, for example, in 7575, it pretty much states a one-to-one relationship between an ASA and an AF, and that's bad.
It does not.
Joel and I just looked at it. It does.
What do you mean one-on-one relationship?
Well, it says an ASA implements an autonomic function.
It does not say that.
Mm.
Okay.
But in any case, I think that it needs to be more clear that an autonomic function may be comprised of one or more ASAs, and an ASA or one or more ASAs may implement the same or multiple autonomic functions. So even if I'm wrong on that, there's some work to be done there.
I think this is not rocket science. We need to get a clear sheet, draw it all out, and write it down. It's not.
The one other thing is that some autonomic functions could be rather complex, and I do think that you need an agent as the interface to the autonomic function, but you don't necessarily want to mandate that the autonomic function itself is implemented only using agents. So another minor clarifying thing.
The autonomic function, not only using agents.
So you always want an agent as the interface to the autonomic function, but you don't want to say that an autonomic function is implemented as an autonomic service agent, right? I mean,
how else?
Well, a server. So the classic definition of an agent is a simple piece of code that does one thing, right? So even for parsing, if I wanted to read monitored information from a variety of network devices, good luck doing that with one agent, right?
So
you would probably have a parser factory that.
Yeah, that's an application that I did not have in my head.
I'm anal retentive, so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Guys, could you take this offline? We are running over time, so yeah. This is your last slides, I believe.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So
check, but I think it's last.
Yeah, that's the last slides. So we're done here. So we have another session on Thursday afternoon, 4:20. So see you guys Thursday. Yeah. Hi there.
I was actually in Singapore for IETF, so I went to Singapore. I don't think